Um, we're going to go and get started. Today, we are going to be talking about some reach tips. That's going to be our focus today. For those of you who have never used Zoom before, we are doing this in a webinar, not a meeting, so the functions will look a little bit different. Your options should be near the top left-hand corner. If not, that means you might have already moved them. They will just be your audio settings. There is a Q&A function there if you wanted to ask questions throughout the training today. Feel free to use that, as well as the chat function, which most of you have already kind of located and placed your kind of name and where you're from in. The raise hand feature is also there for you. If you would like to ask a question live, I can unmute you. Just simply raise your hand, or if there's something really specific that you would like to share. So with that, our reach tips topic today is common things people forget to do in reach. So originally we had kind of scripted it as common things people forget to record in reach. You're kind of modified it to things that people forget to do in reach, and we all know that we've all been guilty of this. Sometimes it's just a slip and we forget to do it, or maybe it's something that we don't know we should be doing. We want to make sure to highlight a few things today that as your scorer here at ECS that we tend to see come up a lot, and things that you guys might have general questions on in terms of things you might not be doing because you either are forgetting or didn't know you're supposed to do it. So that's going to be our topic today. We will have time for kind of questions at the end. We're not going to plan on going too long today. These reach tips webinars are designed to be a little bit more open and free-flowing for you guys to ask questions if need be. And we want to make sure you guys leave with good information today. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So the first thing I want to get into is using the correct time for events or volunteer time. We tend to see this a decent amount, and sometimes it can be because of inexperience, but a lot of times people tend to either forget that we use decimal time or aren't necessarily calculating their decimal time correctly. I'm going to go ahead and pull up the chart really quick so you guys can see this. If you do not have this decimal time chart, we do make this readily available for you. So if you do need it, let me know. I can send it to you. We don't necessarily need it right down to the very decimal. We try to kind of round at least to 2 decimal points to keep us honest in that point. But you guys can also round your time. If you're not really sure whether or not that person volunteered for 1 whole hour, or maybe it was only 45 minutes, or if they were there for 50 minutes, sure, use 50 minutes. If you're wanting to round that up to an hour, because you're like, I can't really remember, I'm not, time tracking them, making them, punch in, punch out, I'm not getting an accurate read, it is okay to use kind of your best guess estimates if need be. We're not here to tell you exactly how much time your volunteers are giving, because we are not there, so we can't say whether or not it's right or wrong. But we do want to at least make sure you guys have this chart. So for accurate tracking purposes, you're not just putting it in under 30 minutes if they were really only there for, like, let's say 14 or 13. Just make sure you're being accurate in where you're rounding to and not over exaggerating. The other thing with using decimal time that I wanted to, and the reason I kind of wanted to talk about time tracking today as a forgetful thing that people don't do in reach, is make sure that if it's applicable, that you're breaking these up by problem goal. If you do not know that already, most volunteer time or service provided time, if you have the ability to break it up by, let's say, alcohol or tobacco, let's say you talked about alcohol for the first 30 minutes of your presentation, and then you talked about tobacco for the second 30 minutes. If you're able to accurately make those distinctions, make sure that you're breaking it up in reach by the allotted time. When you're doing something like the example I just stated, we're going to go ahead and actually hop over into reach now so we can walk through one of these and give you a quick look. When you're doing one of these, let me just go to our test website so you guys can see one. When we're recording one of these as a accomplishment output as a service provided, maybe we gave this presentation, we had 2 different topics, I know I can break this up, so I should. So in order to do that, I'm going to select preventative as my service. The time or the number served is not going to change. This should still be the flat number of people who were at your presentation, whether or not half of them were there or not. It was the full total who were there. So we're going to go with 100. We're going to say we're at my presentation. The length of service is where we need to do that kind of dividing. So this is why I wanted to point this out when we were talking about length of service or time tracking today, because I want you to reflect the time you spent on each problem goal here. So if I only talked about alcohol for 30 minutes, 0.5 becomes my length of service. Hopefully, as you guys know, we're going to go ahead and put alcohol in here, underage drinking, and I'm going to continue my entry. The next thing I would do is obviously copy that first one and come in and simply change this to now tobacco, because tobacco was my second half hour of my meeting. So to understand this, you're still getting your full time of service that you're providing, because both of the entries will then add up to those 100 total length of service hours. So you're not going to be shortchanging yourself anywhere, but you do have to understand that if you only talked about tobacco for 30 minutes, your length of service needs to reflect that for that entry. With that being said, is there any questions on kind of time tracking, anything that people feel like they tend to do wrong a lot that they want to kind of talk about? The next common thing that people forget to do in Reach is forgetting to add media, which I know might seem kind of crazy, and some of you who are really good about putting in your media might say, what are you talking about? I never forget my media. That's the easiest one, or those are so, I do those all the time. However, you would be surprised how often people tend to forget recording these. And a lot of times, us as your evaluator, we don't necessarily know that you're forgetting them. In some cases, we can, especially if it's something like a meeting that you have and maybe you passed out flyers. If we don't see the media entry for that, we're going to probably say, hey, this should be recorded as media too. But a lot of times you guys might be passing things out, whether it's at an event, or maybe it's sharing a Facebook post or something on social media before the event leading up. A lot of people tend to forget to track that media, so we wanted to make sure to hit on that today too. Take time to really reflect on your social media as well. Some people are really good about this, having a time each month set aside to go in and do specifically their media entries. They will go into their social media, basically copy and paste into their Reach entries what those posts were about, so they can make sure to get all those tracked. That's great, and some people are awesome at that, but then you also need to take a step back and say, were we featured in any newspaper articles that we have not recorded? Sometimes you guys might have media coverage, or someone might repost something of yours that you're not necessarily counting because you don't think about it, or you might not even have see them post it. So make sure that we're doing that as well. Okay, we did have a couple things come into the chat, so I'm going to take a break. I have been following exactly how my director does Reach, and everything is getting flagged. I am modeling exactly what she has done in the past, and a lot of my Reach is being rejected. Okay, Ashley, I do not score your data, so I can't speak to exactly why they're getting marked as kind of flagged, rejected type thing. But a common reason why people get rejected is due to each coalition tends to record some things differently, and making sure that they're still following the guidelines necessary for each output type for each section can be a bit tricky. And I do believe, yes, you were with Hancock. So my biggest tip, I guess, to you would maybe be, I do have a webinar that we've done in the past on common reasons why I get rejected. So if you want me to, I can actually send that to you. It might be helpful. The other thing we could do is maybe have a follow-up webinar just between me, you, and maybe Sandy and whoever scores your data, if that would be helpful, to maybe walk through a couple things to help kind of bridge that gap between why you're recording them this way and why we think it's wrong, because a lot of times it's hard for you guys to get your point across in a description to us when we're not there actually seeing you do it or know what you mean exactly. So let me know, Ashley, we can kind of follow up after today if you want to talk about those other options. Kathy said, what about emailing flyers to other people to share? So that's actually a really interesting one, Kathy. That, especially nowadays with working from home and everything, you would kind of have a twofold entry there. The first one being the number of flyers that you emailed out, so the number of people you emailed. So if you sent it out to 10 people and said, hey, forward this to 10 additional people. In order to track that, I would almost make sure that the people you sent it to kind of send you back a copy or a receipt type thing saying that, showing that they forwarded that to 10 other people. I hope that's kind of what you were talking about, but you would almost have, kind of a twofold there for your media entry in terms of entering that, because, I mean, those are impressions and you want to make sure that you're getting those if they are indeed forwarding that to other people. Elizabeth said, does that include Facebook posts for the actual upcoming meeting? Yes. So really, I think what I'm trying to understand what you're asking, Elizabeth, is it just plain Facebook post for an upcoming meeting? Yes, anything and everything that you post, make sure that it goes into reach. The big thing is if someone also kind of reposts or shares it, they would get a number of how many people viewed it. So you might have to kind of follow up with some people sometimes. But typically if someone shares it, it does include the views that they get by sharing it on your direct post. So you should be okay there. Melissa said, should we use metrics on social media to put in our numbers? Melissa, do you mean metrics as in kind of like analytics for kind of like your Twitter, your other social medias like that? I guess maybe give me a little more context there. Just want to make sure I kind of answer your question correctly. And Ashley said it's mainly under reporting, providing information. I would love, okay, Ashley, I'll follow up with you today. I'll make a note really quick and we can kind of talk about some options, what we can do there. Our next common thing that people forget to do in Reach is not adding organizational improvements. This is a big one that we see come up, especially around reporting time, when we tend to be looking for these more to do evaluation reports or even kind of your progress reports for DFC. We tend to get to this section and sometimes we'll see that coalitions are lacking. And that could simply be for the sheer fact of a lot of your reporting gets done in accomplishment outputs, and this one just tends to get pushed to the wayside. However, we wanted to make sure that we were very pertinent in saying that organizational improvements are important. We understand that they don't happen all the time, especially not as often as accomplishment outputs do, but they do happen and we want to make sure that you're recording those at a good rate, making sure not to forget any. If you're someone who's like, what are organizational improvements? That's okay. They're actually going to be all of your activities internal to the coalition. So your organizational changes, your trainings that the staff and members are attending to build the coalition's capacity, as well as technical assistance as well. And the big reason we wanted to emphasize recording organizational improvements and trying not to forget about them is because they're a huge important role when it comes to evaluation. An evaluation and just in general, when you're trying to kind of tell your coalition story, show your worth, you want to be able to say that, we have taken into account every single thing that we do, that the community does, that may have happened, to say we were able to excuse me, we were able to influence this type of change in my community. That's why organizational improvements are so important. And along with these, we also wanted to kind of touch on that other part of Reach where people tend to not forget, where people tend to forget to add things, which is key events. Key events is another area that people tend to not record stuff in simply because kind of out of sight, out of mind. You don't tend to see it a lot. You see it as a tab at the top of your screen, but if you don't click on it often enough, or you don't obviously look at it often enough, you're going to forget about them. Another thing that people forget to a reason why people forget to add these is simply because they don't hear about them or they don't realize that they're learning or hearing about key events. You might be simply talking to a local community member who maybe is even your friend, and they start gossiping about something that happened over the weekend. That could be a key event. So making sure to keep that in the back of your mind that it kind of sucks sometimes, but always thinking back to the coalition, is what this person's talking about that happened in the community, could that affect the coalition's work? Should I be recording this somewhere? It sucks sometimes because sometimes you just want to be like, I left work, I'm 9 to 5, I left, I'm done, I'm not thinking about coalition work. But the work that we do is so community focused, we sometimes have to make sure we're still thinking about that. And I like to think of this in terms as I have a puzzle. So if I'm explaining this to some people, I say, I have a 3-piece puzzle. My first piece is my accomplishment outputs. My second piece is going to be my organizational improvements. And then my third piece is my key events. In evaluation, we need all 3 pieces to, accurately tell our story of the coalition and the work that we're doing in our community. If we just have 2 of the 3 pieces, it's good, but as you guys would know, it doesn't make a full puzzle, right? You're not necessarily looking at all the aspects of the work that you're doing or things that have, the ability to affect the work that you're trying to do. So making sure to have all 3 of those, a healthy mixture, is going to be very key in making sure that you get good evaluation within your community. The thing to add here is kind of a caveat. We understand that key events don't happen all the time. So just because we don't see them in Reach doesn't mean we think that you're forgetting about them or think that you're not putting them in, because we understand that they don't always happen. And that's okay. We just want to make sure you guys are still having this active conversation, whether it's kind of with yourself when you're recording stuff in Reach, of, hey, was there any key events last month, or, last week? Was there something I missed recording? And so on and so forth. Kathy said, can you give an example of organizational changes that might be overlooked? I do like this, excuse me, Kathy, because some that I tend to see overlooked are ones that get recorded as volunteer time in the accomplishment output section. So if someone goes to or sends their, we'll say parent representative, parent sector rep, maybe they send them to a training to go learn about how to properly lock up meds in the home so they can turn around and teach other parents. We tend to see people record that as a resource generated for their volunteer time. And then however, we don't see it transferred into the organizational improvement section as a training to increase the coalition's capacity. As long as there's someone who is part of the coalition, whether it's a member, a sector rep, a board member, they can be recorded as a organizational change if they're doing any kind of professional development that's going to then turn around and help the coalition. So you can ask people too at your meeting, say, hey, has anyone done any kind of professional development, gone and attended a training that you think is going to enhance, the skills to, better equip our coalition? That's another big one we see overlooked just because people don't think to ask. And sometimes that's the big thing, is just remembering to ask, has anyone done this? Is a good one to do at your meetings. So I hope that kind of helps a little bit, Kathy. I can kind of, if you want more examples, we can talk through some offline too. Melissa said, so key events, as an example, if we are concerned about vaping, tobacco, marijuana, could a key event be the eval health this year made many school parents reach out to us, for more info, or is that too broad of a topic? Melissa, in terms of that one, I would say I would consider it a key event based off the description you just gave me, simply because I know a little bit more about your guys' work since I do score you guys. And it might not seem very large in terms of some of the other key events you might have that come into your community, but it still could have an overall impact on, your communication that you're having with with groups and students and parents. It could have an impact on, student downtime and what they could be doing. So I would say yes, especially considering it could actually, in a way, impact your student survey data too, right? So that's what I would say. The big question to ask yourself, and this is for anyone with key events, is every community is different. My community is my community, and asking myself when it comes to key events is that specific enough to my community? In one community, Melissa, I know in my community we do not have a lot of people. We're a very we're near a city, but we're still very kind of backwoodsy. I mean, our graduating class is like maybe 80 kids each year, so we're small, but we're not too small. But in terms of a key event in my community, someone getting busted for heroin is actually pretty large in my community, or getting busted maybe selling heroin. That's pretty large. In a community that's near a big city, someone getting busted for selling heroin might just be a daily happening. So that's kind of one thing you do really have to ask yourself is, in terms of my population in my community, what is going to be significant enough for me to record it as a key event? Next area or thing that people commonly forget to do in REACH, and this is a big one I wanted to talk about today. It's not really things that people forget. I just wanted to make sure we hit on it today because descriptions, as you all probably well know, are a main reason people get marked as needs attention for their entry. Basically because we do not have the same mind as you. We're not there seeing you do everything as you do it. So in order to score your data, we rely on what you put in the description. And sometimes, and we know it, you guys are super busy people, the last thing you want to do is spend tons of time entering data into REACH and spend tons of time writing all these descriptions. But sometimes just making sure that you have what you need in your description is very important. And we do recommend being specific, but being specific to the point where it has everything it needs, but it's not overloaded with tons of data that we can't make out what you're trying to actually record. The big thing here I want to go through is just an example. So we're going to talk through one today. And the main thing I want to start out with is this one. So a coalition held a meeting for 1 hour to talk about coalition activities, upcoming events, and planning. Who out there thinks this is a good description? If you don't, why do you think it's not a good description? Maybe pop in the chat a few things you think, from your point of view, you would add to this. Yes, Gil, number of members present. Yep, that's a good one. Melissa said, need to add how many people? Perfect. There's no substance. Yes, Caitlin, love how you pointed that out. Detail about activities, and agreed. So you guys are all honestly hitting on the big main things I want to see that this entry does not have. It doesn't have the number of people there. It doesn't have, in specifics what was talked about, and more specifically the substance, as Caitlin pointed out. And really wanting to know, obviously, what happened at this meeting. I mean, it just needs more content, right? So we're going to take a look now at the data entry form, and I'm going to kind of walk through how I tend to think through this if I was entering something into REACH. For my description, so this was our example that we started out with on the side here. The first thing I tend to do is add my basics. So I might add this in first, and then I might go back and backfill some data, which is what we're going to do right now. So the first thing I like to do is make sure that this talks about what problem or goal was being addressed. That's right off the bat where I like to start. Making sure that if my meeting was specifically about the upcoming prescription drug take-back day that we're going to be hosting, I know that in my description I need to have that in there so my scorer can see, oh, hey, all they talked about was prescription drugs. She has prescription drugs as her problem goal. The next thing I go through is actually going to be the output types. This helps me make sure that my description is encompassing of everything that I need to have to record it. So the first thing I ask myself is, were we working on any kind of community change that we're kind of trying to get passed, approved, policy implemented, whatever it may be? If there was, I want to make sure that in the description I'm saying what new or significantly modified policy, program, procedure we were working on. And I want to make sure that it's clear that it is new and that we're working on it, not accomplishing it yet, right? The next thing I go into is my community change. So did we in fact, implement a community change at this meeting? Maybe, maybe not. But I do need to still ask myself, was this a viable output that I should be recording? And if so, is that stated in my description? Obviously, their next output type is media. So asking myself, did I hand out media? Did I hand out flyers? Did we give out brochures? Do we give out, pens with our logo on it? What did we do in terms of media for this specific day? After that, though, you also want to then think back to, did I post, a meeting reminder on Facebook? Did I post another meeting reminder on Facebook? Did I send out a email to all those who are coming with the meeting agenda? So making sure to think about those things too, not necessarily for my entry here, but just for future entries that I need to remember to record. Obviously, after media, we get into resources generated. So there I need to ask myself, obviously, my meeting doesn't have how many people were in attendance, right? You all kind of caught on that. So I need to ask myself, how many people were there? For how long was my meeting? Make sure that those are both in my description. Then we get into in-kind. Was there any other in-kind donations I had at my meeting? Did we have meeting space donated? Did people volunteer time to drive to the meeting? So was there volunteer time in terms of travel? Did we get food donated for the meeting to give to people to eat? Were supplies donated? Did we have our meeting at the local library and did they donate the projector for us to use? Things like that, we need to really make sure that we're thinking of so we get that cash and that amount in our entry as well as our description. And then obviously our last output type, which doesn't typically come up with coalition meetings, but we have services provided. So asking myself, was there a service provided at the specific activity or event that I'm recording? So now that we've thought through all of our output types, most of you, I'm sure, have issues with strategies. The last thing I then think to myself is, the intention behind this meeting was what? Was the intention for us to plan and talk and just kind of, share information about what's coming up for the coalition? Most of the time, that's the general basics of coalition meeting, and unless your meeting has some specific kind of enhancing skills or some other maybe strategy to it. I will say though, probably 99% of the time, coalition meetings are simply just, vomiting of information everywhere, right? So when I think of strategy for my coalition meeting, I'm going to think it's going to come down to the basic of providing information. Once I have all that narrowed down, I then can go ahead and rewrite my description. I have wrote this one on the page here for you. It's just simply XYZ coalition, so I'm being specific about what coalition it is. This is very pertinent for those of you who may have youth coalitions, just so you can kind of tell the difference between whether it's a general coalition versus a youth coalition meeting. Was held in February for 1 hour, so we still have our 1 hour in here, and now we can see that I have 20 members that attended. The meeting was held at the local library where meeting space was donated, so I'm stating what in-kind service I had, so my meeting space donated, and how long or how much it costs per hour. That'll let my scorer know, oh, they had a 1 hour meeting, they had meeting space donated for 1 hour, they have $100 of in-kind, right? I did not have travel time donated because our coalition doesn't recognize that, so I didn't record that here as well. But if your coalition does recognize that, I recommend adding it as a separate entity. So saying, 1 hour coalition meeting with 20 members, and then maybe in parentheses or somewhere right here, adding, 1 hour of travel time per each attendee. Then we get into what was discussed. So this is kind of what Tiffany and Jackie were going to hit at. I want to know more about what was actually discussed at our meeting. At my coalition meeting, we talked about the upcoming spring Take Back Day that we were going to be hosting. So that to me, as a scorer, says, okay, so they talked about prescription drugs here. Next, they talked about installing of the new permanent prescription drug box at the police station. Again, prescription drugs. But another thing here that I'm noticing is this is a new kind of community change that they're working towards. So this lets me know that they should have this as a community action as well. The next thing they talked about was planning for future events and upcoming task force meetings, followed by distributing 20 how to lock up your meds flyers. That last one obviously tells me they're going to have a media aspect as well. So for this coalition, I can now look at my output types and say they should have a community action, they should have resources generated, and they should have media. They're obviously going to have more than one resource generated because they have two different things happening here. But that is how I encourage you to think through some of your coalition entries, is do it by output type and really think through, you know, what am I talking about? What was the focus of our meeting? What was the intention behind our meeting? Intention, focus, and kind of thinking through that strategy will be really helpful in helping you guys kind of narrow down and really develop good descriptions. The other thing we didn't really go through with this example, which we did talk on earlier, is making sure that if this coalition talks about prescription drug take-back day and maybe their tobacco cessation classes that they were going to be teaching, again, remembering to split that up in terms of your volunteer hours. That's the only really reason you'd have to split it up would be for your volunteer hours. But again, making sure to have that distinguished in your description though, that, you know, we talked about the upcoming prescription drug take-back day and permanent drug drop box for the first 30 minutes of our meeting, followed by, you know, planning for future events and, you know, our tobacco cessation classes for the second half hour. That will then show us the reasoning behind why you broke it up the way you did. If you're someone who's like, you know, screw that, I don't want to break it up, you should know that then you're going to be using your general ATUD filter when terms of problem goal addressed. So just make sure you have that. Jackie said, if you email a digital version of an event or initiative flyer to the coalition instead of handing out a paper copy at a meeting. Oh, email, sorry. Yes, Jackie, same thing though, still gonna be media. In terms of time tracking, is that what you're kind of asking? You know, would you record that as a volunteer time for them reading it? I guess, just give me a little more context there. Oh, how do I capture? Okay, yep. So, excuse me. So the basics for that then, yes, would just be a simple, keep it under flyer, under media. Even though it was a digital or kind of emailed version, I still recommend putting it under media as a flyer, newsletter flyer category. And then for your impressions, it's just simply the number of emails that you sent out or the number of people you sent it to. That's where I was getting into a little bit earlier too with your media tracking. If someone can prove that they then forwarded that to 5 other people, ask them to include you on that forward so you can count them as additional impressions. So if you break up time for resources generated by problem, do you break up the space resources too? I would recommend it, yes. It can get very time consuming as you can start to think of, you know, oh my gosh, if I start breaking up everything, I'm gonna have tons of entries. Yes, that's where though we really do try to, you know, get people to use that copy button for that reason, because you technically only have to enter it once. Just make sure that your description somewhere kind of states, you know, this will be broken up by both to reflect both problem goals, or make sure that it's clear that you're doing that. That way you don't accidentally get marked as needs attention for something silly like that. But yes, Kathy, you could technically break it up by that too. It's a little bit harder for things that you can't really tie time to, like space. But, you know, if you're going to say it was half and half, I mean, then yeah, you could split it up to half and half. Common things that people forget to record, and that's in-kind donations. Make sure that when you're recording in-kind donations, we really want to break it down to asking ourselves, obviously, what are we saving? I tend to see people missing things simply because I'm a little bit, I don't want to say closer, but I do talk to some clients more than others. and we'll talk through some things, and then I will go and look at their reach, and I'll be like, well, she didn't even record this, or he didn't even record this, they didn't do this. So making sure that anytime you have an event, an activity, something that you feel like attributes a dollar amount to, ask yourself, are we having to pay for this with coalition dollars, with grant funding dollars? If not, if maybe you're paying for it out of your own pocket, someone else donated money that's not restricted funds that you're then using, that can technically be used as in-kind donations for the coalition. Sometimes people tend to forget that even something as simple as, maybe going to, the craft store to pick up supplies for an event you have coming up, or going to the grocery store to pick up, a case of water bottles. If you're there at that store, if you get any kind of discount, whether it's 10 cents to like 20% off, make sure that you're keeping that money and recording that as an in-kind, or keeping that receipt at least so you can kind of document that, track that, and recording those as in-kind. Simply because a lot of times people don't tend to think of certain things, like we were talking about with the coalition meeting, travel time. Some people don't even think of attributing their coalition members' travel time to and from, meetings, events, as a in-kind donation or volunteer time, obviously, but it is. So make sure that you're tracking that. If you're the coalition coordinator or director or whatever your position is as a staff, if you do not get reimbursed for your mileage, make sure that you're tracking your mileage to and from coalition events, simply because that's an in-kind value. So making sure that we're really kind of, I call it putting on my crazy coupon lady hat and asking ourselves, what can we save? What are we saving? Because we want to record those as in-kind. So, okay, anywho, the last thing that people forget to do in REACH is services provided. So we've kind of have noticed this theme of its kind of output types, different things here or there. And in terms of services provided, I want to make sure that people are recognizing this one as well, because I tend to see people recording things like a meeting with the school principal to discuss a upcoming, prescription drug educational presentation, maybe. So if you're going to plan on doing this presentation at the school and you gave him a little mini presentation at this meeting, you can count that as a service provided. The big thing here, though, is making sure we don't get into doing too much service providing. Sometimes a meeting's just a meeting and they're volunteering their time to talk to you. You really have to kind of ask yourself, do I have some sort of presentation, skill building type of aspect to my meeting, to my presentation, to my time that I'm spending with these people? If so, then it's probably a service provided. If not, that's where you're probably just going to pull into the volunteer time for those that you're serving. Hopefully you know that you cannot be providing someone a service while at the same time they're volunteering their time for you. So things like coalition meetings. Coalition meetings, people are there to volunteer their time, talk with you about coalition activities, events, planning, whatever it may be. You're not there to strictly educate them, enhance their skills. That's why at a meeting, most of the time it's going to be volunteer time. At a presentation, a tabling event, kind of a training that you're providing, that's more of your service provided. However, like I said, there are certain aspects where I might go and talk to the school principal and give them kind of a brief presentation that I want to start giving to the youth. If I'm giving them a presentation or kind of a sneak peek, that amount of time that I'm doing that for is a service provided. Also, things that I tend to see people record that don't get recorded as a service provided as well is sometimes community actions or community changes. If it's your first time doing a training, they do a great, phenomenal job at making sure it gets recorded as a community change, but then they forget to record it as a service provided as well. So make sure that when you are doing certain things like that, that you're really thinking through those output types and saying, do I have more than one output type that I could be recording for this event? And if that's a question that you're unsure of, feel free to ask your SCORE and be like, hey, did I miss something here? We try to do a good job at writing accepted or needs attention notices if you should have it recorded elsewhere. We do try to make sure that you guys have that knowledge, or if you didn't record it somewhere, we say, hey, this should be a service provided as well, or hey, this should be a community change as well. That way you guys are getting the credit you deserve, because we know that everyone makes mistakes. Everybody has those slip-ups. We can't all be 100% all the time. So we want to make sure, though, that you're getting 100% of your credit. So we want to make sure that we can eliminate those things that we forget as much as possible. Kathy said, what would you call interviewing for community assessment and leading focus groups? In terms of, let me think through this. So what would you call interviewing for community assessment and leading focus groups? Since you are conducting kind of interviewing, I would consider this more of them providing you volunteer time, Kathy, to gather data to do your community assessment. Simply because you're not there to actively educate them, enhance their skills, I wouldn't necessarily see it as a service provided unless it has that aspect to it. So unless you're going up to them at this focus group and saying, hey, we're going to do an educational piece for the first 20 minutes, and then we're going to do a focus group for 20 minutes after. Then you could kind of have that. You do have to make sure you have that fine line of dividing up that time then for, this part was for volunteer time and this part was for the service we provided them. So I hope that kind of answered your question. But thank you guys for joining us. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. And as always, stay healthy, keep your families healthy, and enjoy your time at home and with your family. And let me know if you have any questions. Thanks, guys. Have a great day.